All right, welcome everyone to CYBV 301. So this is the outside of our classroom, and I just want to point some things out real quick. So if you go to the announcements tab, I make a lot of use of the announcements tab, and so you're going to want to be kept abreast of when I drop these updates. Another piece of advice too is that there's going to be a lot of material drop. I highly suggest just opening up a folder on your desktop and saving the stuff there. And sometimes I'll just drop links. So open up like a Google Doc or Microsoft Word, and throw those links in there because you never know when you might need them. I also have I share my favorites here in this class, and so you can import those to your browser if you want. But either way, I make a lot of use of the announcements. So if you click this drop down caret for the announcements and go to notifications. This is something I'm also a student. I attend Dakota State University and I use this feature in every class that I take. But you can opt to have an email sent to you basically when anything changes in the classroom, whether that's an announcement gets dropped, content gets changed, um, again, anything in the class. Okay. And so while it can be kind of spammy in terms of like, if I go and make a lot of updates to the classroom and you have that checkbox fixed, you're going to be getting a bunch of notifications. Um, so that can be kind of annoying, but again, you're kept abreast of what's going on in the classroom. So again, I do highly recommend doing that. And there is a function where you can have it sent to your phone as well. I've never used that, and it appears like it's even aged off here. So that might have been a feature that they've even done away with, but just know that some D2L platforms do contain that. All right. So again, outside of the classroom, content. When you click content, we have our week one material here, right? You can find the syllabus and stuff if you go to start here. Book access, we'll talk through here in a second. But this is the week that we're in, right? Week one. So these are your outcomes. You have some reading in chapter 1 and 2. Okay. Really not that bad. And then quiz one. The quiz is all multiple choice, right? So no stressing over that. And it is open note, open Google. You can use your PowerPoint presentation, literally whatever you want, so long as you're not using another student. Okay. So, really, really no excuse to do well on the exams here. Now, there are a couple other links here. We have like two videos to if you want to watch. They're kind of cool, kind of leveraging like how important the cybersecurity space is. And then I have an Accessing Cyberopolis video here. Hopefully, you had a chance to watch that. Other things in the classroom that I'll point out aside from week one, before we get into book access, is this program assessment quiz. I'm probably going to say this every single week because I always end up getting a bunch of questions at the end of this course. But this quiz, you can go and take it, and it doesn't matter how awful you do on it. Okay. At the end of the course, I will give you a 100. The reason for that is we are trying to benchmark the level of knowledge that people have as they're coming into the program. And then you'll take another program assessment quiz at the back end of 498, the senior capstone, to see how much you've retained from the program. Okay. So again, I'm going to explicitly say this at least 7 more times, but take the quiz. Regardless of your score, I will turn it into 100 at the end of the semester prior to submitting grades. Okay. And then final exam opens up December 1st and runs through December 11th. So let's talk book access. So we are on the 5th edition for this book or for this class. There is a 6th edition that came out right around a year ago, I think it was. And while there's not a ton of material differences, I do suggest using the 5th edition just because any material differences, like if I tell you to read chapter 1 and half of the stuff that's in chapter 1 has been moved to chapter 2 in the 6th edition, you're on the hook for that, right? And so it's just simpler if you use the 5th edition book. Really, it's just updated stats and some emerging threat stuff in 6. But so O'Reilly is going to be our platform for accessing that book. You see the book here. If you go to security and computing or type that in the search bar, it'll take you to our book. Okay. There's also the same book used for 385 if you intend to take 385. Now, just a real quick second on the O'Reilly platform in general. So I've been doing this for a while, and O'Reilly has the best platform that I've ever seen in terms of training. Okay. This platform has just about any topic that you could want on it. And it has it in a lot of different modalities. So if you are trying to learn, let's say, CompTIA Security Plus material, let me go to, you type in Security Plus. Now you can look at books. There's 37,000 books that you can access for Security Plus on here. Not all of them are relevant anymore, right? It's cataloging things that are like, fourth edition of the exam, fifth edition. There are courses that you can watch, almost like a lecture series, right? Where people are discussing content on the Security Plus exam. And some of them, if you go out to like the Pearson Live Lessons website, like this class, and that's for CCSP, not Security Plus. But either way, these live lesson classes are like $2,000, right? If you pay for them directly from the Pearson website. And so being able to have that accessibility to these classes for free is huge, right? And so audiobooks, all kinds of stuff. So again, just about any certification you're looking for, it doesn't have everything, but it's pretty close. Is going to be there. They even have like people who randomly, like a live course right now, this person decided she was going to hop on. She scheduled this day and time to talk about writing effective prompts for Chat GPT. And they have the classes like that going on all the time. So again, amazing resource. Okay. And you get free access through the university. Those of you that are in the military, though, you can go through the DoD MWR library and get an even bigger selection. What you are seeing now is the military version. Yours is slightly different if you're on the university edition, but just know that if you are a veteran or active duty, then you have access to the DoD MWR library. Now, other platforms that you can use to get more training, right? Cybrary is going to be one of those. Cybrary.it. You can create a free account. It does have some paid content. It also has some free content. I utilized this when I was studying for my CompTIA Advanced Security Practitioner exam, and I found it to be invaluable. Okay. This is just another platform among many. You're going to see that for cyber and IT related topics, there are so many different training platforms that it's absurd, right? So there is no reason to be ill-equipped for workforce tasks, really, or whatever you want to do. Another site is Pluralsight. Now, the disadvantage of Pluralsight is this is paid. Okay, I think you can make a free account. Someone has a hot mic. You can make a free account, but you can't access anything unless you pay for a plan. But it's worth asking if you are working in industry or really anywhere if they pay for a Pluralsight account for their employees. Many organizations do, and in which case you have access to some really good content. One area of Pluralsight that I'll specifically point out there is there's a guy by the name of Dr. Josh Stroshon who taught at Dakota State University, the university that I attend, who went on to work for Google as their lead malware scientist. And he has entire series up on Pluralsight and YouTube where it'll take you from nothing to something on malware analysis. Okay. So if malware interests you, I would highly suggest going and looking at his material. And if you don't know what malware is, that's okay. We'll talk about it here in a couple weeks. All right. So the next website we have is the portal.cyberopolis, right? So you have a student portal. You probably don't have all of the stuff provisioned to you, and that's okay. But you have your student portal. So let's log into 301. Okay. And so this has changed. The portal has changed quite a lot, right? So it might take me a second to find exactly where I need to go. But ultimately, for week 2, you are going to have to log into the CLI server. Okay. So there is a help section here on how to connect to the CLI server. So if I click that, one of the big things that I want to point out to you is that you must select your appropriate operating system. A lot of people here at U of A like to use Mac. So please, if you're on a Mac, select Mac OS. If you're on Windows, please select that. And if you're on Linux, please select that. And it'll take you through how to download PuTTY, what to put in for the parameters, and then make sure that you actually use the full username and then the password. I have in the Accessing Cyberopolis video, I have a section where I talk about the password. Okay. The password is not going to reflect you punching in keys, right? It is designed to do that. And so, and it's also kind of finicky, right? So I talk about this in the Accessing Cyberopolis video to a high degree. So if you have not watched the video and you send me an email asking, why can't I input my password? I'm just going to redirect you to the video. Okay. An alternative maybe to PuTTY is okay. And I know that SolarWinds has kind of a bad name nowadays, but Solar PuTTY is actually a much more useful tool. Um, Same thing, it just has a better UI and it also does auto login, which I find useful. So once you put in your username and password once, you can use Solar PuTTY and just click on the thing and it automatically logs you into the VLE. Okay. So there's some tools for you. Again, I need you to be able to pull up, that command line prompt here. This is exactly what it should look like whenever you get into there, or pretty close. I think these prompts have actually changed a little bit, but ultimately that's where we're at. So I'll pause there for any questions, comments, concerns about anything that I have brought up so far. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into the material then. So week one, again, we're exploring that vulnerability threat control paradigm. Please take a second to look at what we'll be talking about today. And then the next slide is going to go over how the course is formatted. Okay. So this is the course. This corresponds to week 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. All right, let's get started. So what is computer security? Ultimately, it's the protection of an asset. What is an asset? Well, an asset could be anything. It can be people, processes, hardware, software, firmware, right? And how do you value or put a monetary number on an asset? Well, ultimately, in a lot of cases, especially in the space that we're working in with computers, it is very subjective, okay? The value depends on asset owner's perspective, right? How personal is it to them? How time dependent? How, this can be imprecise. Ultimately, the example that I like to give here is think about the company Coca-Cola, right? Whatever the brand that makes Coca-Cola. If they kept the recipe to Coke on one computer that did not have cloud backup or any of this other stuff, it was just a local file saved on one computer, how much do you think that one computer would be worth? Rhetorical, but a lot, right? Whatever essentially the value of the company is. Because if they lost that, then they lost their recipe and they can't make Coke. And so did they pay that amount of money for that computer? No, it was probably lowest bidder contractor $200, right? But now that computer is suddenly worth how many ever billions the company's worth because it has its proprietary information on it. Okay. Extreme example, but all of that is to say, like, you cannot value an asset based on its replacement cost, right? Because in that, going back to my extreme example there, if that computer fails and they cannot recover the data and they go out to Best Buy and buy another $200 computer, that computer still doesn't have the recipe on it. It still doesn't offer them any more value than the other one had. And so a direct replacement cost is not generally going to be, a feasible metric for replacement. All right, so let's change our perspective a little bit, or change concepts here. Let's talk about the vulnerability threat control paradigm. So a little bit about me. I absolutely despise reading from the slides because when I was in the military, that was about all that they did for any presentation. And so I will do my best to make sure that I provide you with the context around the information on the slide. But in some cases, I will have to read the slide to you. Okay. Like, you need to know what the definition of a vulnerability is, right? So I can't really get around that. But my promise to you is that I'll do my best to make sure I give you the context around it. So a vulnerability is a weakness that is subject to being exploited. Okay. These can be realized. They can be unrealized. Unrealized sometimes has a term associated with it as a academic vulnerability, right? But a realized vulnerability means that someone somewhere out there has the capability to exploit a vulnerability. Think vulnerability as almost a window, or actually, let me walk that back. So, a vulnerability to your house might be a busted window, right? Anybody can crawl through that window and then get into your house. Um, Likely unrealized if nobody has done so, but if realized, someone has done it, right? Hopefully that kind of ties it together for you. So then we have a threat. A threat is a set of circumstances that could, if realized, result in harm, right? And this can come from a wide spectrum of areas, right? It can come from humans, it can come from nature. Think South Florida in hurricane season, malicious, non-malicious, targeted, and random. So on the human side of things, you can further break that down into malicious and non-malicious, right? The malicious people, most people already understand that area, right? Like hackers, terrorists, disgruntled employees are just a few to name, right? Or we're actually going to have an entire discussion on what those human threats are and their different classifications, white hat, black hat, gray hat, and stuff like that here in a little bit. But I know that it can be broken down to malicious, non-malicious. Now, non-malicious, we've all dropped a tablet or a computer or spilled something or accidentally deleted something we didn't want to, right? That happens. That's not malicious. It's an accident, but it is still a threat that we pose. Now, non-human threats, right? This is pretty straightforward. And there's a little bit of comedy on the slide with the squirrel eating, the cables there. And I have personally had that happen before where I was in the middle of doing my homework one time on my computer, the internet goes out, I do the basic troubleshooting steps, come to find out my dog had actually eaten through my Cat 5 cable coming from my router to my computer. And so they persist. Those kind of threats absolutely exist. And hurricanes, putting a data center in South Florida, probably not the best idea, right? Like you have to risk plan for all of that stuff. So controls, right? What is a control? Well, it is a form of protection, right? That is going to reduce a vulnerability. There's a lot of different control frameworks out there, right? But I just want you to understand that a control is a way to reduce risk or reduce a vulnerability to an acceptable level, which should be, it depends, the risk threshold depends, but ideally you want to reduce a vulnerability to none. But so over on the right, we have the CIS or Center for Internet Security Controls. It looks like this is an older image. CIS used to be top 20, now it's top 18. So they combined a couple of these. But understand that Center for Internet Security is a control framework. There's also the NIST Special Publication 853, which is Security and Privacy Controls and Information Systems. And there's a lot out there. OpenFair, COBIT with ISACA, the Sherwood Business Framework. There's a lot. So takeaway is that there's a lot of control framework. Controls can prevent, deter, deflect, mitigate, detect, and recover, right? That's ultimately what their goals are. And you have layered controls. We call classes of controls physical, administrative, and technical. You will rarely ever hear someone say procedural control, okay? You're pretty much always going to hear it referred to as physical, administrative, and technical. Now, physical controls are exactly that, right? Think outside of Target, they have those big red balls in front of the doors. And while they are partly used for decoration, they're also called boards that are used to make sure that people don't rail their car in through the front of the building, okay? Walmart does something similar. Most major stores do that. Malls are actually really intricately built for physical controls, but they're exactly that, right? Having something there physically to deter to deter. We'll talk more about how we break down those controls here in just a minute. So administrative controls are just policy. Okay. And that's the paper that says, hey, this is what we're doing. Okay. And then technical controls is where cybersecurity professionals like to live because that is the ones and zeros, how we configure the firewall, how we set up the switch or the router, right? Those are going to be like logical controls that are implemented. So the way this kind of appeals or is put all together. Well, let me go back here. So water is the threat. The water is rising. If unchecked, the vulnerability is the crack, and the wood will spill over to where this individual is standing and potentially flood his area. Okay. But the finger is the control. And so the water can rise just about as far as it wants. But the vulnerability has a band-aid over it, basically, so that the water can't come through. So what constitutes an attack? Well, we have several different categories of attackers that have different motives. And then we have method, opportunity, and motive that have to be achieved as well. So let's talk about that. Script kiddies are the lowest level tier of attacker, right? A lot of times it's people who have no idea how the programs work. They're just trying to get revenge or be funny. They download a program to go out and do something malicious, but they don't code it themselves. They don't know how it works. They don't understand what the ramifications really. Okay. That's script kidding. White hat are the people you bring in from, like, let's say an external organization like Deloitte to come do an audit and say, hey, we need a vulnerability assessment. Can you do that for us? Okay. Security audit, do a controlled pen test. And they're contracted to do that. So they're not malicious. They're just trying to increase your security posture. Then we have black hats, right? Black hats are guys that are more sophisticated in script kiddies, but black hats also have a wide range of spectrum, right? From barely being above script kiddie all the way to being incredibly advanced, crafting your own malware, having your own identity or brand on the dark web, right? But ultimately, black hats, they're able to cause some serious damage. Malicious guys. Next, you have hacktivists. They're not necessarily trying to break things, but they're trying to push political agendas, usually. Insider threats. Your cybersecurity education is going to bring up insider threats like it is the thing that you must worry about at all times of the day. But the FBI did a study, and the study results show that the average organization faces an insider threat once every 20 years. And if you really analyze how many probe attempts there are or attack attempts on a daily basis for some of these organizations, it's not even close. Like there are tens, hundreds of thousands of attempts a day, sometimes per hour, on some of these companies. And so I'm not going to necessarily worry about the 1 in 20. Okay. That's not to say it's not important. Insider threats can absolutely cause more damage than external guys because they have the intricate knowledge of how the organization works. And then finally, we have nation state actors. You're never really going to hear it referred to as that either. They're going to be called advanced persistent threats. And really think it's like a government-backed hacking group, okay, that goes out and does, executes agenda items for that particular government. So ultimately, nation-state actors or advanced persistent threats, incredibly skilled. They have basically an unlimited budget, okay? They often operate outside the boundaries of the country that they work for attribution purposes. It's a really messy area. So what do all these people need to be able to execute their agenda, right? Well, they need method, opportunity, and motive. We'll talk about each of those here more in a second. But as we analyze this picture, right, one, the opportunity is that it's nighttime. There's probably no one there in that office. The method is that he's using keys. He got some kind of access to be able to get to those keys and unlock a door. The motive is, hey, he's trying to get into the finance office so he can get paid. On that note of getting paid, early on in computing, and when I say early on, I'm talking like 90s. In the 90s, hacking and a lot of these like threat groups did things for notoriety, right? If you really think about it, we didn't get e-commerce and online banking until late 1997. So prior to that, it was more of hey, I was able to break your code. I'm like, great on me, So notoriety kind of thing. But then once e-commerce and online banking came around, that's when the major shift in focus became monetary. And really, almost every kind of attack nowadays boils down to some sort of monetary gain, even if it's theft of intellectual property. That intellectual property is used for competitive advantage and or selling, right? I can sell it and get more money on the dark web or whatever it is. So off my soapbox. All right, so let's talk about method. So the method by which these people are able to execute their attacks, right? So we have social engineering, which is by far the most effective. Inside of social engineering, there's a lot of different techniques that can be leveraged, right? We have phishing up there, which is think of that as like the random email that hits your inbox that says, "Hey, I'm a Nigerian prince. We're related. Please send me $500." Right? It's like a shot in the dark. You'd be absolutely amazed at how effective they are, though. But that's phishing. Vishing is when they call you and do the same thing, right? Hey, like, please send me some money, whatever. There's SMS phishing or smishing, what you'll see it referred to as, and that's when they text you, the same thing. There's also, there's so many different techniques under social engineering, but whaling, spear phishing are other commonly employed methods where you start targeting people based on information you know about them, and then targeting high wealthy individuals. Media drop is when you take like a thumb drive with, let's say, some malware on it, and you load it on 20 different sticks, right? USB sticks, and you throw it in the parking lot or the conference room or the cafeteria. And people will love to pick stuff up like that and then shove it into the computer like they have no idea how dangerous that is. And then, so again, a very effective move for them. But that all is followed under social engineering. We have client-side attacks, right? And then network attacks. So client-side attacks are taking advantage of applications or hosts, or a lot of times maybe even end user, okay? Network attacks are going to be the least successful. This is the route of most resistance for people where they're trying to probe like edge devices and see if there's like a security misconfiguration, maybe like a default password or something on a server. But again, this is not the preferred route for these attackers. Now, opportunity, you're going to have time and access to be able to execute an attack. Or placement and access is probably the better term there, right? Being able to be close to something. And then also, like, just going off of these pictures off of the right? Like, this organization probably has no concept of physical, administrative, and technical controls, right? Like, we're surviving people, we're not thriving. Where this company over here is probably thriving and they got their stuff together, and they're probably going to be, and again, this is just a picture, but they probably have controls in place to at least thwart attackers, or maybe they have something called defense in depth, which I think we talk about here in a little bit, where if one control fails, there's another one that can take its place and still reduce the risk. All right, and then motive. This is super old. I don't think it was even accurate back then because I've seen cyber warfare, and I know that it's much bigger than that. Okay. So again, motive for most people nowadays are going to be financially based. All right, so let's change gears for a second and let's talk this is called the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is something that I need you to like tattoo on your brain, like not physically, but I need you to remember this. And like I still get seniors sometimes when I teach CYBV 498, the senior capstone, that can't recite CIA appropriately. And everything we do in cybersecurity will boil down to one or more of these goals. Okay. So let's talk about what each one of these are. I already defined what CIA is in terms of like face value terms, but other desirable properties that people tend to associate this with, and really it depends on who you're studying with. Cisco has their own stuff, but three more properties that are desirable. Authentication, that is a big one. Okay. Non-repudiation is a fancy word to say that you can't deny having performed an action. so accountability, and then auditability. And funny enough, when I worked in the Marine Corps as a system administrator, auditability was probably one of the worst things that I saw. So let's talk confidentiality. So confidentiality is being able to make sure that information access stays within authorized individuals only. Okay, confidentiality is broken when an unauthorized individual is able to access or view information, environments that they are not supposed to see. This is typically going to be handled with some sort of encryption, right? You can also handle like access to environments through authentication, right? Strong authentication, dual factor, multi-factor. But confidentiality, especially when we talk about protection of information from unauthorized access, is going to be taken care of via encryption. Now, the CIA triad for integrity, right? Ultimately, integrity is making sure that information is consistent, that it stays in the same manner in which it was intended to be. So maybe the example here is like if I send a message to the class and say, hey, welcome to week 1 of CYBV 301. That's the message I'm trying to convey to you, right? And it should say that when it gets to you. But integrity is broken when I send that message, but you get, hey, everyone, please take the week off. Don't worry about coming to class, right? I didn't say that. Excuse me. So I didn't say that, right? So integrity at that point has been broken. Someone viewed my message to the class that was unauthorized. They changed it and modified it. So the data is no longer has integrity. Now, I'm going to stop real quick and show you one of the primary ways we verify integrity is through hashing. We're going to talk more about hashing and what hashing is, but I just want to quickly show you this. Let me go to, I'm going to show, hold on. Okay, so this is Microsoft PowerShell. If you're on a Mac, you don't have this available to you. You have your terminal. But so I'm basically just in my downloads folder on my desktop, but through the command line interface. And the command for doing a hash in Windows PowerShell is get-file hash, and then you have to pick the file that you want to hash. Let's do an enrollment example. So Microsoft, and let me pull up a magnifier because I know people are going to struggle to see this. Okay, now on this example we have here, Microsoft PowerShell defaults to a specific algorithm, which is the secure hashing algorithm 256. And the hash itself is this. It is a unique serial number for this specific file. Okay. And then it shows where that file is located. But this is the important part. Now, if two dissimilar files produce the same hash, which should never happen theoretically, but does, then that hashing algorithm has been proven to be prone to something called collisions. And collisions make that algorithm useless. The way that we verify like integrity utilizing a hash is, let's say I sent this enrollment example.csv file to you. I hashed it on my end, and this was the expected outcome, right? The ending in 72FC2. You hash it on your end and you get something different. Well, that file has changed, and you should not accept it from the sending source. You should ask them to either resend or send via an alternate communication method. Because again, the file changed. That's the big thing there that it's trying to show. And then availability. So one thing about availability that gets me is that a lot of times people associate complete shutdown as an attack on availability. Can it be that? Yeah, absolutely. However, it does not need to be a full shutdown to be an attack on availability. Let's say it takes you normally like 5 minutes to be able to access file A on your computer. But now the network is so degraded that it takes you 15 minutes to get to that same file. Hey, that's not a complete shutdown, but that is a severe degradation of performance. So authentication, right? So major concepts we have here: identification, authentication, and it's not up here because it's not in your quiz, but authorization. So identification is when a subject claims to be a specific identity. What that is equivalent to is when I go to put in my username on a website. Authentication occurs when I prove my identity. Hey, I know I have a password that I can put in that only I should know, and I'm proving my identity. Okay. And then authorization, right? You may be able to log into a computer, and if you're working, this example makes really good sense, right? You may have access to your computer, but you may not have admin privileges. You may not be able to access certain files and folders, right? That is the authorization piece. You likely do not have authority or authorization to access everything on that computer unless it's your personal computer. Now, authentication methods. We have something you know, something you have, and something you are. However, I also need you to memorize that something you know is considered type 1 authentication. Something you have is type 2, and something you are is type 3. Single factor authentication is when you just rely on one of these, right? Single point of failure. Multi-factor authentication is when you combine two or more mediums of authentication. So let's talk about each one of these. Again, so we have type 1 authentication here, something you know. This is the easiest, the cheapest implementation option. The National Institute of Standards and Technology says that we should be using passwords that contain no less than 17 characters. And the last time I saw it was supposed to be a passphrase, not a password. Okay. But ultimately, these are easy to guess. And as hardware and high-end desktop computing continues to evolve, the time to break those passwords or type 1 authentication gets lower and lower. Next, we have type 2 authentication, something that you have, right? Think of this as like a YubiKey or a common access card, a uniform, driver's license, something that you physically have to be able to help authenticate you, okay? This is, can be better than something however, it's still not foolproof, right? Again, especially if you're relying on single point of failure single authentication, single factor authentication, I should say. Good grief. But again, it's something that you physically have. And then something that you are. There's a lot of different types of biometrics here. So type 3 authentication. You can authenticate via fingerprints, palm prints, vascular patterns, voice and facial recognition. However, they can all still be beat. High-resolution images have been shown to defeat facial recognition. There for the longest time, back when the iPhone had that little Touch ID button on the iPhone, I think up to like iPhone 5, maybe. Apple actually had a major vulnerability where if the owner had recently pressed the Touch ID button and you coated it with a thin layer of baby powder, and then you use tape to extract that baby powder, you could unlock their phone. So again, ultimately, there's also a ton of privacy considerations for something you are. There's also health concerns when you start talking about doing retina scans and stuff like that. So there's still a lot to be determined in this space, but ultimately it is not foolproof. Is the major thing, right? Any one of these, if you're just relying on it for single factor, is not great. Now, let's talk about access control. Access control is defining really the who, what, when, where, how, and why of you are getting onto a particular asset, okay? So you must define, like, what is the business justification? How are they going to get on? Is it going to be via, maybe it's like a virtual desktop infrastructure environment where someone uses their personal computer to log onto the internal network of your company. or maybe it's a company issue laptop, or what are the hours they're allowed to log in? Or do they need to use a VPN? Do they, all these things have to be defined for access control. Now we have the concept of least privilege. So that means that you should have no more permissions that are absolutely necessary to do your job and nothing more. Next, we have need to know. So a good example here is like for things that you don't work on, you don't need to have access to them. The good example here is like in the military, working in classified environments, right? So you may have a secret clearance, but you do not need to know all of the secret information. You have your pie, slice of the pie that you're working on, and that's all that you should have access to. Now, separation of duties, think about it like this, right? So the person who writes the check should not cash the check. Ideally, there's three people in that situation. There's a person who writes the check, a person who cashes the check, and a person who audits that person 1 and 2 did not collude and that everything is on the up and up. So that would be an example of separation of duties. Now, rotation of duties is something that I've only seen academically discussed. And the concept here is that rotation of duties says that every 6 months, the team should pick up and rotate positions within the team. And that's done for two purposes. One, job satisfaction. You get to work on something new every 6 months. But two, the person who is oncoming is basically auditing the previous person's actions, and any kind of fraudulent behavior can be detected. Now, those are major concepts, right? For access control. Now we have implementation methods of access control. So the first one we have is discretionary access control. That's managed by the user. So when I go to my desktop and I right click this file, and I go to properties and I go to security, then I can, local users, I can set permissions for all day. Okay. That's discretionary access control. Mandatory access control means that we have data has a classification and the person needs to have a clearance and they must match in order for access to be granted. We have role-based access control based on group membership, and RBAC or role-based access control is going to be the most implemented way of handling access control in industry. Okay. It's super easy. You basically make a bin that says, hey, developers, and these are all the permissions they need. So when someone joins the organization, you throw them into the developer bin. HR, IT, the execs, same thing. Super easy. Throw them in the bin. Permissions already there. Then there's rule set based access control, which is based on specified rules for individual objects, an object being something on the network. List-based access control is lists of permitted users for each object. And token-based is kind of the inverse of that, where we take lists of permitted objects for each user. So the access policy, again, must define the who, what, when, where, and why, and how. Let's define non-repudiation and accountability, okay? Again, non-repudiation is being able to not be able to deny having performed an action. And on the cyber realm, one of the ways that we do that is through a digital signature. And a digital signature, again, nothing is foolproof here. And that's why it says digital signatures may not guarantee non-repudiation, right? Because things happen. But it is a pretty good method of being able to determine non-repudiation. And ultimately, it takes someone's, not to get too far ahead because we haven't talked encryption yet, but it takes someone's private key, signing information, and ideally only that person has their private key. Okay. And yeah, I won't get too far into the weeds on what a digital signature is and how it works, but just understand at this point in week 1 that digital signatures do offer some level of non-repudiation because the information is signed with the individual's private key, which only that person should have the private key. All right, auditability. So this one, I kind of mentioned how the DoD had awful auditability earlier, but ultimately this is a really hard area. If you do full packet capture on every piece of traffic on your network all the time, it is so unscalable. There is so much information traversing networks nowadays that you would have to have insane, unrealistic amounts of storage to be able to hold that. And so what happens? Well, one, you can scale it back and say, hey, we're not going to do full data capture, or maybe we're going to do full data capture on certain things, right? But then you have to determine what's the priority. Where do we really need to focus our efforts for logging? Are we using cloud? Are we using on-prem? All of these things, how long are we going to retain the data for? That's a whole nother thing. Okay. All of these things must come into play when you are determining the level of auditability for the organization. And there's still a lot more to it, but just understanding that auditability is logging and being able to put the pieces of actions together on a technical domain or a logical domain. All right, next we have harm. Harm is the negative consequence of an actualized threat. So some factors of harm here. We have interception, which is a direct attack on confidentiality. Okay. Some unauthorized individual is receiving information that they shouldn't. Interruption, which is an availability attack. We have modification, which is an integrity attack. And then fabrication, which is kind of blurs the lines between confidentiality and integrity. So risk of harm, this is a very rudimentary level of being able to express harm, right? But ultimately, you're going to see this rather commonly. Risk expressed as the probability of occurrence and the impact, okay? And so, again, this would be a mixed method of qualitative and quantitative kind of methodology. Quantitative because we're assigning numbers, and qualitative because we have a color scheme associated with it. But ultimately we need to understand, like, what is the likelihood that something's going to happen and what is its consequences. Risk identification. There's a lot that goes into risk. Okay. So like what is important? What is our risk threshold on a daily basis? Risk threshold being like, hey, what is our upper and lower limit associated with risk. Risk variance on a day-to-day basis, that risk needle will move. We have so when talking about risk, we have different ways that we can handle it as well. You can accept the risk and say, hey, this is just part of business and this is the way we're going about it. You have risk transference where you say, hey, I have to take part in some kind of risky behavior, but I'm going to go get insurance, and insurance will help me in case I suffer a loss. You can deny it and say, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore. Or you can mitigate it. Okay. And mitigating it means you're applying controls so that it gets put down to an acceptable level ultimately. And that's where you get residual risk. So you have inherent and residual risk. So inherent risk is just the nature of doing business in whatever sector that you're in. Okay. Like that is the face value risk. However, after controls are applied, we have residual risk. You cannot reduce risk to nothing unless you don't take part in it. Okay. So even if you apply controls, there will still be some level of risk associated there. And that's where you get your residual risk. And you want that to lie within the risk threshold so that, business can operate without assuming too much risk. All right, putting it all together, we talked about the threat vulnerability control paradigm. We talked about what harm is. We spoke about portal.cyberloss.com. Again, that's really for week 2, but I needed you to set that account up so that during week 2, you're not lost. If you have not done that, please go do that as soon as you possibly can. At this point, do I have any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay, well, if I don't have any questions, comments, or concerns, or maybe I see a lot of messages in the chat.
I
One
have
second.
a question too.
What's
If I
up?
may.
Professor, can you hear me?
Yep. I
Go
think two
ahead,
of you
sir.
are
Go
talking
ahead.
over each other.
Yeah, go ahead.
You sure? You can go ahead if you want. It's all right.
I was just going to say, Professor, if you could. First of all, my name is Shannon Green. How are you, Professor?
Yeah, I'm good, Shane. How are you?
I'm all right. Um,
Good.
can you do like a? I know if you can try to do a walk, a step by step on how to set up the command line interface on the Cypher Hyperlist, because I have it already set up. It's just how to do it.
Yeah. Hold on one second. I think I have another video. Did you watch Accessing Cyberopolis? Because I think I get to the command line there.
Uh, oh wow.
Have
Okay.
you watched this video?
No, I have not. That I have
Okay. So
not.
that video will take you to exactly what you need to get
Okay.
to.
Outstanding. Very well.
Are you Army, Shannon?
Marines.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, 351.
Oh, sick. All right, cool. I was a 2651, a 0207
Okay.
back in the day.
I wanted to go to 11. However, the family, the growing up in the urban environment with family, kind of negated that. But that's a different drinking conversation.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. We'll simplify. All
Right.
right. Who else had a question?
I had a question.
All right.
For the quiz that's due on the 27th, should we expect the majority of the questions to be from this lecture, or is it going to be a mix of what we got to read, or what would you say is it going to be a rundown of mainly?
Yeah, great question. So I would say like 95% slides and then 5% reading. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah. And then remember, everybody, the all quizzes in this class, and really most classes in this program, are open note, open Google, open PowerPoint. Like you can use everything available to you except another student. All right. Any other questions or concerns? All right. Well, hey, I hope you guys have a meritorious day. Let me know if you need anything, and good luck on the quiz for this week, and we'll talk soon. See you guys.
Have a good one, Professor.